So we are about to start a series. We're KDH Counseling. So we're going to do a podcast series on all things therapy. So we're going to start today though with brain. So the biology of how we are, or the way that our brains and our bodies works, greatly impacts our mental health, obviously. And so today, Whitney Storey, she's a PLPC and she's a professor. She is going to discuss brain function. We're just going to kind of see where this goes.
Yeah. I always, my poor husband, I do this with him all the time, of like my love and appreciation of the brain really changed the way that I understood my own anxiety, especially in grad school. That was kind of like the peak of it. And so because of that, it's really become like this natural thing that I talk about with other people, whether that's my clients or like I was texting with a friend last night, and all this stuff just kind of comes out now because I find it to be so helpful. So yeah, just having an understanding of like why our brains are the way that they are. And I think that really starts, if we back way up to the idea of understanding that like, I am not my brain, which I think for a lot of people is just a thought that like never came up before. I don't know, it feels, you probably can relate to that too, that like for a long time for me, it felt like I am anxious, and that the thoughts that were happening were because of me, and the feelings that were happening were because of me. But I mean, it's just, my brain just does stuff sometimes.
And it's the way brains are made. A lot of times, with anxiety, I try to explain it like that was created so that we would stay alive, right? So we would see something and have a physical response. But now we have all these false alarms due to our brain, I don't want to say malfunctioning, but just doing what it naturally does, right?
Right. I mean, we had like for forever, if we go back to like our cave people ancestors, like, I see this shadowy thing in the distance and I'm really hungry. And that shadowy thing could be like a big berry bush, and that sounds delicious, but it could also be a saber-toothed tiger. And we're the ancestors of all the people that were like, oh, I think I'm going to stay back in the cave. And I mean, they survived. So they had lots of babies. So this hesitation of like, there's a thing over there, it could be good, but also it's really scary. So I think I'll just not.
It's true.
And so our brain learned like that sending out red flags kept us alive. So our brains are constantly looking for danger, but we don't have saber-toothed tigers anymore. So our poor brains, like now rejection is a saber-toothed tiger. Failure is a saber-toothed tiger. Imperfection is a saber-toothed tiger. The little subtle facial differences that you see in humans when you're talking to them become saber-toothed tigers. And literally to our brains, there's no difference between like an actual saber-toothed tiger and these things that can't actually kill us. So our reactions to them, and the fact that we're like, our brains are so focused on watching for these things, it can get really overwhelming.
Well, yeah. And I see it a lot. So I specialize in OCD. And so they have more people with OCD have more gray matter in their brain, and their threat sensitivity is super high. And it's based on a lot of times just thoughts in their head. So it's not even reality. They call it, the cognitive distortions, thought accident fusion, but because they're thinking it, they think they did it, or it's going to happen. And it's exactly what you're saying, right? It's all just thoughts in our head.
And they feel really real, especially I'm thinking about like, and I feel like that's a whole nother podcast, but if we look at like classical and operant conditioning, and like humans we are animals at our most basic. And so, somebody with OCD, or somebody with a phobia, or somebody with just general anxiety like me, like if I avoid the thing that's making me feel anxious, I feel better. And so that's really reinforcing. So of course, why wouldn't I avoid it next time?
Exactly. I mean, it's how we're made, but when you avoid it, you increase it, right? It's like a compulsive, I look at it as a compulsive avoidance, and it just keeps society going. So explain what did you call it? Classical and operant conditioning. Explain what that is. Brief.
So it's called associative learning. And basically, if you are a creature, a being that's basically fancier than a plant. So like earthworms, goldfish, we don't tend to think they're very smart. They learn through associative learning, but also very fancy creatures like humans and dolphins, like we also learn through associative learning. So it's all about associations. It's unconscious learning. It's built into the function of our limbic system, which is a very important part of our brain. And it's basically the idea of learning if then. So in classical conditioning, it's things like, if somebody throws a ball at me and I get hit, like I'm going to have this kind of reaction. And over time, if I continue to get a ball thrown at me, when the person like just looks at me, I've learned that person, when they look at me, they throw a ball at me, I'm going to flinch before the ball even comes. So that can happen with anxiety. If I know that, going to my dad's house, there's a lot of trauma and chaos, I'm already flinching and getting ready for it before I even go. So that's one piece of it. And then the other piece of associative learning is rewards and punishments. So if I feel anxious and I avoid, my anxiety goes down, I've reinforced that avoidance. And it's not a good or bad thing, which I think for a lot of people, especially with my clients, when we talk about anxiety, like, of course it sounds good to like, well, let's just get rid of anxiety. Like if I like wave my magic wand and get rid of anxiety, I would be a very wealthy counselor. But anxiety is really helpful. If I'm out in the woods and I see a bear, like I don't want to have to sit and think about whether I should, fight or flee. Like I just want to be able to survive. So these processes that our brain has learned, and the way that our brain has become a problem-solving, danger-detecting machine, like these are good things that help us in a lot of ways. But I mean, like a lot of stuff, too much of anything can get us into trouble. So when I start avoiding, going to dad's house, but also like talking to dad on the phone, and suddenly Father's Day is making me feel anxious, and suddenly like the idea of having my own kids starts to make me feel anxious, and suddenly my life gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. That's when we see, you and I, that's when we see people, and we have to start looking at the helpfulness of these types of natural processes and learning how to kind of live with them as opposed to just like following their rules.
Right.
So
Well, and it's interesting because when you follow their rules, you make more of the experience of the feeling, right? So this is why I love OCD, because treating it, once people understand that and they're able to act opposite, which is a DBT thing, but that feeling, they actually have less anxiety. And I can tell when they come in session, their speech patterns, or when they're in an OCD loop, are fast and rapid. You can see the anxiety, it's visible. And when they've been doing like abstaining from avoidance and things like that, when they've been facing it, their anxiety and their speech is less in session. I mean, it's crazy how the human brain just unknowingly creates more of the experience by acting on it.
Yeah. And I see that in session with people too. Like I get a few of my clients, like current and past throughout and in myself, now that I'm thinking about it, like when I'm feeling anxious, like I get tighter.
Yes.
And then when I see them kind of like, it's really nice. I like to stay in those moments as long as we can.
Well, yeah. I mean, that is the way through it,
Yeah.
right? Is to train our body that it is a false alarm, or to not just unconsciously act on the anxiety, to be able to differentiate when it's helpful and when it's not. I mean, yeah, this is why I also love working with phobias, because they're treatable. Start to get this understanding that I just have to gradually face it. It's so empowering. I mean, this, facing my own anxiety, so empowering.
Yes. Yeah. And then like it's helpful for everybody, like even people who aren't coming to counseling sessions because their life has been so limited. Like I'm thinking about my students and talking to them about like, hey, if you want a future in a helping profession, being able to be in front of another human, scared out of your mind and feeling like you have no idea what you're doing, but looking like you're here and you're comfortable and you're with somebody, like that's the same process. Learning how like you can let your mind just do what it's going to do and you can be. It's incredibly empowering. I love it.
Well, and can you give more of a description of the brain part? Because me and you could geek out on the anxiety stuff all day long. But like what is going on in the limbic system? Like that whole thing, the frontal lobe, go ahead.
Oh yeah. So first, what I think is helpful for people to know, especially like Monet and I work with some younger clients. And I'm thinking about my students too. And even when I'm working with adults, a lot of times parenting is one of the big topics. So I like to talk about just brain development. And it's really quick in that like our brains don't finish developing until our mid-20s. So for a lot of parents, knowing that like their teenager is, impulsive and not thinking about consequences and horrible at planning, like that this is all developmentally appropriate, offers some empathy. And it can give us empathy for ourselves too when we think about, our teenage years, our adolescence, our young adult years. And the part of the brain that is related to all of that, like, predicting consequences, being a planner, thinking through things, being able to kind of like predict, that's all frontal lobe. That's the very front of the brain, which is the last part of your brain to develop. So while that part of the brain, it's going through intense development during adolescence, during teenage and early adult years, when we're under construction there, our processing goes on a detour through the limbic system, which if you imagine your brain and then you like opened it up to look in the middle, it's like right in the middle of the brain. And the limbic system, this is not Whitney, this is textbook. The limbic system is responsible for the 4 F's, which are fight, flight, feed, and mate. And so it's responsible for all these unconscious kind of reactive kinds of things. Like you don't have to think about whether you're hungry. Like your stomach gets hungry and it starts growling and you just feel hungry. You don't have to think about whether you should, mate, especially if you think about animals. They don't have to like ponder whether they should have babies. Like it just happens. And fight and flight is the same way. So that's the limbic system. When
I have a question, is freeze in that, or is freeze is in there as well?
Yeah, the whole fight and flight system. Now we've got fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. I think is the 4th one that's been added.
Fawn's so close to freeze. What's the difference? I mean,
I think it's a more active freeze, if that makes sense. So like fawning is about like people pleasing. Like I'm not just gonna like freeze up and disappear. I'm going to still be actively engaged in trying to like be who I need to be and please everybody so that I'm safe.
Got it.
So if like the bear is hungry, I'm going to actively try and like provide, here, bear, would you like my arm? Awesome. Have my arm, bear, as opposed to just like freezing. So yeah, and it's all unconscious, which again is good because we don't want to have to think about what to do in danger. But I mean, like, we've got all kinds of red flags in the world, whether you've had traumatic experiences or not. There's, like I said, like the subtle body language or facial expression differences can become red flags, which trigger our limbic system to go into fight and flight. And for a lot of people, especially if we're looking at like trauma, PTSD, that kind of stuff, like their limbic system, their fight and flight system has been triggered so much that it's on.
It's overreactive.
It's constantly scanning for danger, which is why people are overreactive, hyperactive. Like even when they're asleep, they're having like they're processing and thinking about danger and re-experiencing danger because that limbic system has a hard time turning back off.
Well, and I say it's the way I describe trauma in here is that when that part of our brain gets activated, it doesn't know that the threat's over. Yeah. So our brain is doing what it needs to protect us, but part of trauma processes are to tell the brain, that part of our brain, it's over now. I mean, it's such a like, even when I say it in here, it's a tricky one. Some people are like, it's not over. I'm like miserable all the time, and other people are very reassured by that. They're like, it is over. It happened when I was a child, or it happened. And
Yeah.
I'm now 40. I can look at my hands. I'm 45, right? I have 45-year-old hands. I can be like grounded in the now. But that part of the brain, I mean, to me, that's the emotional part of the brain.
Yeah.
That's the trauma processing part, or the trauma part, not the processing part.
Yep, it's the part where we process memory.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm thinking too, like with everything that's gone on with the pandemic and since then, so like working on the perinatal mental health certificate that I'm doing right now, we know that pre-pandemic rates of postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety, you'd see that kind of problem in about 24% of women after giving birth that experience some kind of issue. Since the pandemic, that has gone up to 75% of women who've given birth. And it's because like literally the threat has not ended. We are literally we are under threat. And there's things that we can do to, of course, like getting vaccinated and avoiding crowds and that kind of stuff. But there's so much actual and potential threat right now that a lot of people are struggling with anxiety.
Do you think that part of it too? So I'm thinking of two other factors. Part of it is that mental health now is way more accessible, and I feel like there's less stigma, right?
Yeah.
So people, maybe before, that 24 wasn't quite the right number because people would just bear it, right? I'm just going to buckle down and I'm just going to go through this and I'll get over it. Where I think now there's so much education out there, and it seems like the stigma is lessening. I mean, I could totally be wrong, but that's what it appears.
Yeah, I think we're definitely doing better in terms of stigma, but I mean, I even talking to my husband, it's amazing how, boo, you're married to a counselor. How are you going to feel weird about like thinking about going to counseling?
I know. No, welcome. I totally get it. My guy's the same way. And that's a tough one, but to each his own. But I do think that piece, like people, it seems a little better. It does for people that maybe are searching online, they might find more information now. And then the other piece is the isolation.
Yeah. Yeah.
We are such social creatures, and that I feel like there's more isolation even in my life. And I go out in public, I do all this stuff. I don't live in any sort of anxiety day to day now. But I still go out less than I used to.
Mm-hmm.
My life has changed.
Yeah. And people who are struggling with anxiety, you feel safer the more you can control. And so that means like the fewer people that are in your life, the more control you have. So it's one of those perpetually, I don't know, it's difficult. It's one of those cycles that like the more you isolate, the more you avoid, in theory, the better you feel, but also the smaller and smaller and smaller your life gets. So
and the more anxious you will feel.
Yeah.
Because that part of your brain just keeps getting reinforced. And I want to say it's growing, but whatever, it's just more activated.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, so I'm going to take a training. It's coming up. I'm not till September or October, but it's called the deep brain. It's called deep brain reorienting, but it's like deeper than the limbic system. What do you think is underneath that? That's even deeper. What would be? I don't know the biology behind it yet.
Yeah, I don't know what they would be.
Okay.
I don't know. It'll be interesting.
I know. I'm wondering.
I feel like, and when we talk about brain development, we talk about like old brain or reptilian brain and the new brain. I feel like old brain's about as deep as it gets. So that'll be really interesting.
The little bit I know about it, it's the reaction we have within milliseconds. So it's probably going to be part of the limbic system, but not the verbal piece.
Yeah.
Whatever's beneath that. And so what do you think's beneath that? Then it would be the limbic system, but it would be the nonverbal. I wonder if
it's like what is that called when they train clients? Biofeedback. I wonder if it's like a biofeedback kind of thing where they're training people to recognize really subtle cues, before it gets to like our thinking and our processing about it. But like, the very first subtle cues that anxiety is happening, like changes in heart rate, changes like my hands get sweaty,
I think
Yeah.
they say like change, like a tension in your neck, your jaw,
Yes.
like really subtle. Cause
Like
you,
vagus nerve,
yeah. And
vagus
what
nerve
is the
kind of
vagus
stuff.
nerve? Explain what that is.
I am just beginning to like dive into the vagus nerve stuff, but it's the nerve, as far as I'm understanding, it's the nerve. It runs back behind our ears and then all the way down, and it's related to all of this instinctive, reactive, fight and flight, survival kind of stuff. So it must have a very important piece in, I would guess, probably like the blood flow that's involved in our autonomic nervous system, that when our limbic system turns on and it takes blood away from like our stomach and brings it to our muscles to get ready to like fight or flee. So it's related to like the electrical signals, the neural impulses, and all the blood flow related to all that stuff.
And doesn't it go through our stomach? Is that the one that goes to our stomach?
Yeah, it's gonna be related to our stomach. It'll have some interaction with our reproductive system, our muscle system. Like it's related to all of that autonomic and the sympathetic, the parasympathetic nervous system.
What is the sympathetic? Because you said autonomic is basically just it's a reaction that naturally happens, right?
Yeah, so autonomic, I mean, it's like automatic. That's how my brain remembers it.
Okay.
And the autonomic nervous system has two parts, and it's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So the sympathetic nervous system is the one that, like, when you have danger, it's sympathetic for you. It's going to keep you alive. So it's going to kick into survival mode, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, all of that kind of stuff. The parasympathetic is the opposite of that, that calms you back down and helps you to relax and recover once the danger has passed. So yeah, these two systems are basically constantly fighting with each other throughout the day.
And if you were to do a meditation or yoga or some sort of stretching, because I don't particularly yoga practice, yeah, I hate that whole form of thing. But it's really good for you. I know that. But if you were to do these type of activities, is that parasympathetic?
Yeah, that's like purposefully getting into your parasympathetic system, forcing your breath to slow down.
Yes.
Retraining your attention to something different. And what's interesting about like trauma and anxiety is that sometimes those types of activities are actually more harmful. So this is something I talk about with my students. One of my classes, we do a lot of meditation, and we talk about like, hey, if you're doing meditation and you're finding that it's activating you, this might not be the way to do it for you. Because for a lot of people, their trauma is related directly to their body. And so the more they pay attention to their body, the more their anxiety comes up.
Correct.
But for a lot of people, their anxiety is external. So they're so focused on what's going on outside of them that reminding them of their body and coming back to their body is very calming and peaceful. So it's such a complex, I don't know, it gets messy, but this is why it's so interesting.
Well, yeah, but I do think it's good for people to know if you have a trauma history, even if you don't think it affects you and you have a hard time relaxing, it's in there.
Yeah.
They have books on this. The Body Keeps the Score is a really good one, but it's in there. And often when people have a trauma history, it's not safe to relax.
Yeah.
Because that part of their brain is like, whoa, the threat's still happening. This is just how I describe it. And so they can't let that part of their body, they can't let themselves relax because something bad's going to happen.
Yeah. So, and for some clients, so like in one of the members of my family, actually, their anxiety would hit them only when they were sleeping. They would wake up with horrible panic attacks, and they were so confused about like, why is this happening only when I'm asleep? And it's because of that, because your brain recognizes when I'm asleep, I'm most vulnerable. And also when we're asleep, we're not like actively engaged with our brain and what our brain is doing, like fighting with our thoughts or purposefully distracting or whatever. And so our brain has free reign. So yeah, our brains are incredibly powerful.
They are. And so I guess the point of this is for people to know that this is biological. And so you can't I think there's so much stigma and shame around mental health, even though it's getting better, I still think people come in thinking because it's in their head, they should know better. Right. And I want people to get that this is biological.
And I think even more specific, it's not biological like asthma or like sickle cell. It's not an illness. Like it's biological in the same way that like the way that our heart beats is biological. Like this is the way that brains work, and there's nothing wrong with that. And so having empathy for ourselves, and I think even more usefully, being able to empathize with our brains, that like my brain is feeling so anxious, not me, I'm not feeling anxious. My brain is feeling so anxious. My brain is working so hard to try and protect me. Like poor thing thinks that there's danger everywhere. And being able to like both get distance from like my brain is different than me, and being kind to ourselves and being kind to what we're working with. I think that's kind of like the first step to doing things different.
I like that. Well, and it's the way in. I often compare it to like diabetes, but I like the comparison to the heartbeat. Just because maybe depression and generalized anxiety disorder is like diabetes, right? Because we wouldn't shame ourselves if we had insulin. We would just take it.
Right.
And we wouldn't not go to the doctor if we had blood sugar issues. We go to the doctor and take care of it. So, but I like that the heartbeat is just it's the natural comparison for what's going on inside, but maybe this diagnosis is compared to, these other medical diagnoses.
Yeah.
Just to break the shame about it, because, really the more we know, remember
yes.
we're kids, the more you know, but it's true. I mean, it's very powerful when you can learn these things and come from a place of self-compassion.
And it's helpful for us interacting with ourselves and us interacting with our loved ones who, have anxiety or depression or trauma. It's helpful for me as a parent, like being able to see my kids' limbic system activation, like being able to see them get like this and then help them figure out how to do this. I mean, it helps all of us, and being able to see like when they get activated, how that activates my system, and learning how to like parent through that. So I just feel like it's a win-win. The more you learn about your brain and how your brain works, I mean, the better.
I love that. So do you have any closing thoughts?
Oh man, I feel like I'm always reminding people that like you're not broken. Like the way that your brain is behaving makes perfect sense, and usually it's being incredibly smart. Like the way, if you think about trauma, if you think about like generalized anxiety, like the way that your brain is watching for danger is so smart. Like look at the way that it has figured out how to protect you. And the other side of that is like your brain doesn't have to keep doing that. And so that's where seeking help, meeting with a counselor, meeting with, a therapist, your doctor, doing medication, doing counseling, that's where it can be really helpful, is that like, wow, your brain has helped you for a really long time. Let's give it a break. Let's teach it that it doesn't have to work so hard. Yeah.
I love that. I think that's good advice, and if y'all have any questions, because, you can message either one of us, we'll attach stuff at the bottom. And we will try to address it. If you want us to do a video on it, we'll do a video on it, whatever, podcast. Thank you so much for talking about this, Whitney.
This was so fun. I'm sure we could go on and on.
We could. We were totally geeking out, but yeah, I mean, the basis is just for y'all to know that it's biological and your body's just doing what it needs to do. Right?
Yep.
All right. Bye.
Bye.